With great excitement, I introduce you to Northwood University, a truly exceptional institution in American higher education. Since 1959, this private, accredited university has been a vibrant bastion of free thought and enterprise, standing out among the thousands of other schools in the U.S. Known as America's Free Enterprise University, Northwood is dedicated to nurturing the next generation of leaders who drive global social and economic progress. At the heart of Northwood lies the Northwood idea, a philosophy that celebrates individual freedom, responsibility, and the importance of moral law and free enterprise. This entrepreneurial spirit is evident in that 1/3 of Northwood alumni own businesses. Northwood is more than an institution. It's a movement that empowers students to think critically and champion liberty. It is a rare gem in today's academic world. If you're passionate about supporting a university that values intellectual growth and free enterprise, or to learn more about its academic programs, visit northwood.edu.
Hey, everybody, this is Saad for the Saad Truth. One of the things that I love in doing this show is I get to connect with people that otherwise I would have never had the chance to meet, the pleasure to meet. Today, I've got the comedian, the actor, and now the author, Rob Schneider. How are you doing, sir?
Thank you. It still sounds very silly, the word author. Like, what? What did I say? I don't fool myself. I think my book it's not like your intellectual, artistry that you bring to it. My book is kind of an edutainment, where I feel like I have to make people laugh, otherwise they'll stop reading it,
Right.
Whereas I really think what your specialty is to be able to persuade people, but through your intelligence and your wit and your will, and your courage to get them to your point of view with reasoning. And that's the thing. Like when I see you give a speech, I go like, man, why am I even doing this? Gad is so much better than me. You're so persuasive, but you don't speak over people's heads.
That's the key.
You're not trying to impress them with your how much smarter than you are, even though you are. But you impress them because you create a logic and a rationale that isn't easily, dismissed.
I think
Because
that's one. Yeah, thank you for the kind words. I mean, I've often had fellow academics say, well, why do you use, your satirical skills? And, that kind of removes your professorial facade. And that exactly demonstrates that they don't get it, right? I mean, and I don't need to explain to you the power of humor. Look, I'm going to use a wide range of weaponry within my arsenal of persuasion. Sometimes I'm professorial when I'm speaking at Stanford. Sometimes I'm, depending on the medium, I will adjust. But to your point, I get a lot more satisfaction receiving a fan mail from a trucker who says that, because he saw me on Joe Rogan, he decided to go back and study psychology at night school. That impresses me a lot more than receiving some nice email from a colleague from Stanford, to your point. But I want to mention, before I cede the floor to you, I want to mention at least the title of the book, You Can Do It, which is a signature saying from many of your movies and so on, and SNL and so on. Speak Your Mind, America. You Can Do It. Speak Your Mind, America. What led you to write this book? When did you first come out from, being a raging progressive? Maybe you weren't, but at least most people in Hollywood are, to actually finding your brain.
I remember being angry at people who were conservative, because how could you? I mean, I didn't even understand it. I mean, I didn't understand I didn't understand the core of what conservatism was, because, the old, I guess the best description that's part of my belief system was how Noam Chomsky describes conservatism, which is conservatism is just adopting what was radical 90 years ago and clinging to it. But some of the progressiveness is where the bad ideas seem to be sneaking in. But when you grow up in a progressive environment that was very culturally, the overused term diverse, it was just a melting pot, which I prefer that, because it's a cohesiveness It's like making a pasta. You know, the idea about being diverse means separate and staying. But the old idea that we used to describe is a melting pot, because it becomes something because of the different mixtures that go into it. So growing up in San Francisco, my mother being Filipino, not understanding any jokes, she would laugh. She had great timing. She'd always like, ha, 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 ha. What does it mean, Robert? And then uh, growing up with that, it was just naturally uh, to grow up and be a liberal, because that was not the dominant time. I mean, at that time you had more conservatives, whether it was by the time the 80s came in, because I just assumed everything was going to continue to get more liberal under the Carter administration. And then by 1980, it was a real stop, and there was a constriction of ideas of speech and attacking that was coming from the right at that time. So that was a awakening, but they have not come anywhere close to what the left has done. And when the left and the right are screaming at the same time, they're really back to back, being just as irrationally authoritarian and sensorial. But I think the left has gone farther than it's any other time in my lifetime. And I think they have more tools at their disposal.
Well, they dominate almost everything in the culture, right? Academia, of course, journalism, Hollywood. I mean, everything is a chokehold from the progressives.
The hegemony of the leftists and their stranglehold on big tech has the potential to do what's happening now, which is really to suppress free speech and freedom. If tyranny does come, and I recognized this in 2013, and I went public with it, tyranny is coming, and it's coming from the left now. That was 11 years ago under the Biden administration. I mean, under the Obama, who was trying to convince people after the second time he was a black president was elected in America that somehow, to quote Douglas Murray, when race has never been better, they try to frame it as it's never been worse.
That's right.
Which is a real manipulation, a real interesting magic trick.
So is there an episodic memory that you have? I mean, doesn't have to be down to the last nanosecond, but something that flipped you from being, a leftist to more conservative. So, and here I'm thinking about, I don't know, do you know Dave Rubin? Do you know who Dave Rubin is? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, he always talks about, I didn't leave the left left me. And then he kind of explains his journey from having
100%.
What was it for you? When was that?
Well, I think seeing parental rights being taken away in California because they wanted to raise their children differently, I didn't realize that the state was intending to interfere in every aspect of the citizen's life in California and to co-parent with them. And so when the state was mandating that the parents had to do all these lists of vaccines that they would take, and we have chronic illnesses that are unheard of when you and I were children, that are happening now, and we have to be able to at least ask questions. And so, whether they, the constant verbiage from the pharmaceutical industry is that cause, coincidence and causation, or we can't go by. Well, we can go by evidence that the parents know something's going on with their children. And so what happened was there was a manipulation going on in the state legislature in, I think, 2013, 2014, where they wanted to, you could get an exemption if you wanted. In other words, if your kid had a bad reaction to a vaccine and you had another kid, which is the same genetic predisposition as your other kid that was injured, you should be able to say, well, I want an exemption so this other child doesn't have a traumatic brain injury, or seizures that would go into it. And so you should be able to get a doctor's exemption or a medical exemption. And so they were trying to take this away. And I found that to be egregious. And then when I
Did you have a child? Forgive me for interrupting. Did you have a child of that age at that point, or it was just an abstract, situation that you were dealing with, or were you personally affected by it?
You know what? I'm one of the, Del Bigtree, who's the High Wire, and he's one of the great advocates for medical freedom in America. Him and I come at this with uninjured children, but I was having a baby at the time, and I remember meeting with a doctor who was married to this director that I was going to be making a film with, and she was one of those TV doctors who would go on TV and talk. and they had a beautiful baby. And, I was about to have a baby. And I said, well, what shots did you give the baby? She said, none. And I said, why? And I said, well, because they don't have an immune system. Their immune system for babies is external, and their immune system is their mother's breast milk, and they can't absorb those toxins, and it could cause uh, brain inflammation. And I'm like, well, why do you tell other people to do it? And she said, that's up to them. So when I met with these parents who had injured children through this medical procedure that they were told was guaranteed to be safe, and it wasn't, and their child was irreparably injured. And my friend Barbara Lowe Fisher, who runs the National Vaccine Information Center, the oldest and longest running parent vaccine advisory group, I was astounded by it. And when the NIH in 2013 came up with a statistic that 54% of children suffered chronic illness, it was something you can't unlearn that. And so I said, well, I got to, so I didn't realize that how it would affect me and my career financially to go up against this monolithic pharmaceutical industry and the tentacles that they have. But the pharmaceutical industry is only allowed to advertise their products in two countries, and it's the New Zealand and it's us. And they spend up to 85% of all ads in a non-election year. So their power is monolithic. It is, it's very strong. So, and
So that
they,
was
and
your original entry into sort of activism.
yeah, I mean, it was, I mean, thinking about children and parents and parental rights and the health of children, it definitely got me into that. And then when you realize, and then Robert Kennedy, and I'm a supporter of Robert Kennedy's, and now we support Donald Trump because we think this is the best way we can to what he calls making America healthy again. You realize that it's not just the pharmaceutical industries that have controlling the uh, power switches of America and the power base. We're all our agencies, our federal agencies, whether it's the FDA, whether it's the CDC, whether it's NIH, these agencies have been captured by industry, the industry that is supposed to regulate these industries. So once you open that up to realize that corruption, and it is globally, you can see how when a industry gets too much power, they could shut down the world, and they were able to do that in COVID. So we can see that, and they're also able to. We got to be careful that we don't start World War III just to satisfy the military industrial complex, which I think, you know, I'm worried about the Democrats staying in power and continuing this war in Ukraine. So this is something that I think you have to put your own interests aside and think about getting involved, because I don't think you can stay on the sidelines at this critical point in our world history.
So political orientation in academia would probably be the most lopsided. There are studies, which I'm sure you're familiar with, that sort of break down the percentage of Democrat professors versus, say, Republican. In the American context, there's a similar breakdown in Canada. And, depending on the discipline, it could be as unbiased as 5 to 1, meaning 5 times as many Democrat professors as Republicans. That might happen, say, in engineering or in the business school.
Yes.
But then in most of the more activist-based fields, anthropology and sociology and African American studies and so on, you can have 130 to 0. I mean, literally, you're more likely to run into a unicorn than to run into a Republican professor in a sociology department. So that's in academia. Now, I suspect that it's almost as lopsided in Hollywood. But how many people do you know? So, of course, the classic ones are Clint Eastwood, are James Woods. I mean, there's you. Yeah. There's maybe a few others I could think of.
Very few.
But so what is it? Is it 5% of all Hollywood people might be considered conservative, or is that even too optimistic?
I would say closer to 12.
Okay.
But I would say of those 12, less than 1% speak out.
Sorry, 12 people or 12%?
12 people.
Okay.
No, it's a 12%. I would say it has grown, because what happens is, I mean, I would take this as an indicator, and I'm not a and I'm not an academic, and I really didn't like statistics in college. I found it to be uh, confusing and also misleading because the statistics you can find out you could get these statistics if you cherry pick the numbers, and that not necessarily the statistics that are saying what's really
There's
happening.
actually a book, by the way, Rob, that many doctoral students will take when they're taking a methodology course, and it's called "How to Lie with Statistics." To your point, I mean,
It was
literally, it's
it
a
was
very small
astounding to
book.
me.
You should read it because it's a very small book. It's very accessible, and it's exactly to your point. Anyways, go on.
No, but it was astounding to me with that in college, in the short time that I was in college until I started making money as a comedian, I was just astounded that I was actually the manipulation of math, but also the manipulation of minds, because and that's it seemed to be what's happening at university. Whereas, I mean, Scott Atlas talks about this much better than I do, the professor from Stanford who was brought in too late to the Trump administration, because I think Trump was manipulated by the people that were there. And according to Don Jr., and on my conversation with him recently on his podcast, he said he's going to be more careful this time, to who he's going to listen to. And he's also not going to be President Trump is not going to be so easily swayed by people who've been there and people who were threatening him with that millions of people would die and it'll be all your fault. So I take this as an indicator. Two stories. One is that my attorney, my entertainment attorney, who said, 5 years ago, Rob, I thought you were nuts. He's in Beverly Hills, but
He's
I can't.
Jewish, of course, right?
Of course he is.
Thank God. Okay, go on.
Of course he is. That's why he's successful in
Thank God.
the pinnacle of his. But he's also totally indoctrinated into this, you know, illogical, liberal
And yet he
ideology.
represents you.
Well, because he's a good attorney, and you have to have somebody from the tribe if you want to get a good deal in show business. So what happened was he called me, says, I can't, I said, I got to tell you, Rob, I thought you were nuts 5 years ago, but now I can't believe what they're teaching my third grader. And I said, so are you still going to vote for Kamala? He said, yeah.
Yes, of course.
So it's like, it doesn't even matter. So those are people you can't get to. But what we're really happening now is we're not teaching kids in this era. And I would just go back to, like, I'm old enough to remember in the early 70s, if you got a university from Santa Cruz, University of Santa Cruz, Santa Barbara, or even UCLA, in the early 1970s, late 60s, early 70s, those were useless degrees. Everybody knows that they were teaching kids, they were getting a degree by sitting out in the woods, holding hands, or they're in flowers, and it's going to be the same thing now. You have these universities that are not teaching kids how to think critically. And I'm not talking about, you're right, not the graduate schools, because the graduate schools of Harvard Business School is still 85% conservative,
Yeah.
but it's 85 to 95% liberal in the student body. They're cranking out illiberalism, and they're not cranking out critical thinkers. They're cranking out advocates to a partisan illiberal ideology. And that's what they're doing now. So I think that's wasteful. And what happens is, to my friend Peter Boghossian, who told me a story at his school in Oregon, where he was a professor, and he said they had an opening in the philosophy department, and one of the people that were coming in for an interview to fill that position in the philosophy department, an associate professor position, the first thing he said, I am from Peru and I am homosexual. So in other words, you
got the job.
You got the job. You have 2 boxes scratched off. So there you go. Why wouldn't you hire me? But the difference is academia allows this and can, because academia doesn't fall. Academia just is this funded system that keeps going and that has been polluted by this leftist and I think Marxist leanings bend, and it's deliberate. Whereas if you were in the marketplace and you had to make money, you had to be a profitable company. If you had to be a football team that was that could kick footballs through a goalpost, if you were a soccer team or if you play for one of the 3 different Rough Riders teams that are a part of the Canadian Football League. I don't know why the hell you have 3 teams. Can you imagine 3 teams in the NFL that were called the
And we've
Cowboys?
got 9 teams, of which I think 6 or 8 make it to the playoffs. So you play 16 or 17 games to get rid of 1 or 2 teams. My name is gone.
So it's insane. So if you had, so there's no logic to it. But if you had to, one of your many Rough Riders who all make the playoffs, as I've just learned, you wouldn't have a Filipino Jew like me, because we can kick about 8 feet of football. You would want somebody better. But if in a philosophy department, you can have as many Peruvian homosexuals that you want, that you can fill the department, because it doesn't matter really. And it unfortunately, it's not the best people that are getting the position, and it's happening all over. It is a woke, as I agree with James Lindsay. It's nothing but, Marxism dressed up as manners. And you have society now where you have a president of the United States, what's left of him, Joe Biden, who wasn't a great intellect 30 years ago when his brain was properly functioning. And he says we're gonna have a Supreme Court justice who is a black woman. I mean, I'm nothing against black or women or black women, but we need to have not the person, the color of their skin or their genitals who's deciding, because we only have 9 in the United States who are deciding to interpret the Constitution for our society and how we live in our society. We need to have the most qualified people for these positions, and we need to return to that. And so I really think we have a system where it is devolving into a system that is not serving society. And I don't think that's a system that will survive. It will collapse at a certain point. You can't have a plumber coming in to fix your toilet based on if he's a homosexual or based on the color of his skin. I want a guy who knows how to get the bopper to go up and down so that the stuff in there leaves my house. I mean,
But to your point about when you mentioned Harvard Business School being more conservative, I've argued that some disciplines are naturally more inoculated against all those parasitic ideas because there is a feedback loop called reality that tests your ideas, right? So
yes,
if you are in engineering and you want to build a bridge, then you can't use postmodernist physics to build the bridge because the bridge will collapse. You can't build mathematical models to understand the economy at Harvard Business School that are completely unwedded to reality, because then someone will be pissed off because they won't make money, because you won't cater to the customers. So there is an autocorrective feedback loop that makes sure that you are wedded to common sense and reality. So that doesn't mean, though, that those disciplines can't be somewhat parasitized, but they're much less likely to be parasitized than activist fields, where the main raison d'etre is just to create, as you mentioned earlier, activists. So I can be in some esoteric department in the humanities, espouse all kinds of bullshit, and there's nothing that slaps me back into reality. If anything, I'll get promoted and I get tenure to parasitize more incoming students. So I think that's the key issue. Okay, I want to talk a bit about humor, because you mentioned offline before we got on that, one of the things that you wanted to do in your book, and let me mention the title again, You Can Do It, ! Speak Your Mind, America. You try to infuse your humor. I mean, that's what your profession is. You're a comedian. You want to try to persuade people through your comedy. I mentioned offline that actually comedians are some of the smartest people. That's why women will always say, one of the most attractive traits in a man is for me to be with a funny guy, because I argue that being funny is a proxy measure for intelligence. There is no way that Dave Chappelle can get up for an hour and captivate thousands of people if he didn't score off the charts in IQ. Do you agree with that correlation?
I agree with that. I do agree with that. I think that has some limitations in it. I think that for us, the idea is the art, I guess Shakespeare, the art of the art is to make it appear like it's not art. And I don't know if Shakespeare is the only person who said that, but it is, we have to make it appear and make it approachable. And I did realize at a young age that with my height, 5'5" on a good day, and with my apparently odd looks, that I was not going to be able to acquire the interest of women that I found extremely attractive unless I had something else going for me.
But is that literally true? Like, do you remember
Oh yeah.
engaging in that
Yeah.
calculus?
I remember, yeah, thinking like this is going to require something else. I also remember like a funny story that I would never want to tell anybody, but I remember like, because I used to play trombone and it did not attract the
The sexy girls.
yeah, it certainly didn't attract anybody. As a matter of fact, it's not a nice saxophone. At least sounds kind of,
Yeah.
sensual. You know. However, I remember going over and you practice, and maybe I practice a half an hour at the most a day, whatever. And I remember going over to my friend's um, house, and his brother was in the San Francisco Symphony, which blew me away because that's the ultimate if you want to be a musician. And I remember he would practice 7, 8 hours a day. I never went over to my friend. Mike Robinson was my friend's name. He was a trumpet player, and his brother, his dad, Bill Robinson, was a tremendous trombone player and a teacher. And his older brother would be in his room doing triplets, doing the scales. And we're the whole time, every time I was at his house. And I went like, man, that's a lot of work just to be the first trombonist in the San Francisco Orchestra. And my friend Mike said, no, he's the third trombonist. No, there's two other guys better than him, and he's working 8 hours a day. I quit the trombone that day, and I said, I got to do something else. And I noticed that with jokes and then, entertaining being in high school, I noticed that was my in. And because I was a nervous kid, because my mother, she spoke very good English, but she didn't understand it. So I was always a little bit more, my speaking was a little not quite stuttered, but it was stop starty because that's just the way I was raised. And so people would laugh. And I remember going, I could either fight this or this could be my way in.
So, okay, I mean, you used it to hopefully get in with the ladies, but then when did you decide, wait a minute, I can make a career out of this?
Well, they did I mean, my dad had comedy albums, so we listened. And I was the youngest kid, so I didn't get the most attention. By the time I said this joke when I was young, I said, my parents, I was the fifth kid, so by the time I grew up, they were over it. They're like, Rob, here's where the alcohol
I'm
is.
the
Here's
exact same way, by the way. I'm fourth of four, and the next youngest is 10 years older than me. So I empathize.
And so you had it all, and but they also left you alone, and then they did spoil you. I remember two things. Like my parents were basically like, Rob, here's where the car keys are. Here's where the alcohol is. Just do whatever you have to do. And I remember my mom when I was a little baby, well, 3 years old, yelling at my siblings because my mom and dad would go out to dinner. They would have a social life. My dad would take my mom to see comedy shows, which she didn't understand, and she'd have explained later because my mom spoke 5 languages, but a distant second language was English for her. She would yell at my siblings, all right, we're going out to dinner. Anybody touch a hair on Robbie, I murder all of you. you know? So
Are they
that was,
still alive?
they passed away. My mom, almost 93. She was a survivor of the Japanese occupation of the Philippines, but never bitter. But I remember my dad, who also, all his relatives were of course killed and, um, you know, by the real Nazis, not the Nazis at the Trump rally the
Not
other
at the
day.
Madison Square Garden Nazis,
Oh,
not those ones.
different
Okay,
Nazis,
different Nazis.
actual Nazis, I mean the definition of Nazis, not people who just happen to be in the second party that were allowed in the United States, not those Nazis, but real Nazis. He used to say this to me. He said, Robbie, John, here's the thing. When they come again, because they're gonna come again, they're not taking us alive like they did in Europe, in Eastern Europe, and Poland. His family was from Tarnopol, which was a part of Prussia, now Poland, Tarnopol. And he said, we got guns. We're not taking us alive. You're going to get this gun. You're going to get this gun. We're going to shoot our way out. And he would have that meeting with us, and he meant it. And I always thought it was nuts. But now that I know it's not nuts. It
Yeah.
isn't nuts. And
Well, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, finish your point.
but unfortunately, it isn't nuts. I mean, we have to I have guns. I never had guns in my life. I do now. So
Wow.
I think it's for the people the leftists and the Democrats who are putting in, who are all for open borders and stuff, and for Michelle Obama and for Oprah Winfrey, these very, very wealthy people that have, as you say, inoculated themselves from the policies that they're pushing.
Exactly.
They don't live in a border state, and
Yeah.
they don't realize that letting in millions of people that will be forever Democrat voters is also putting a lot of people at risk. And they're inoculated. They're living in their, they got gated communities, and most people, Americans, don't.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's continue with so many questions that I want to ask you in
Yeah.
the Hollywood world. Are there any I mean, I'm sure you have a million stories that you could share, but are there any stars that you haven't met that are still alive that you would love to meet? And before you answer, I'll answer
You got
if you asked me that question,
who do you
because
got?
actually it, sorry?
Who would you want to meet?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. Clint Eastwood would be one.
That's
And
the
I'll,
first names that comes to my head too, but I have met him.
okay, well, I want to hear about that, so hold off. But let me finish my answer. Then I want to hear your meeting with Clint. Now, for me, Clint, it's not. A lot of people might think, oh, it's because he's conservative. Not at all. It's
No.
because I grew up in Lebanon, Rob, watching this guy coming into town. Remember, you see how you notice that, hey, I can get the girls by being the funny guy. That was my way in. Well, I
Yeah.
looked at this guy. I didn't speak English, so I'm talking about the spaghetti westerns, and
Yeah.
I said, I want to be that guy when I
Yeah.
grow up. That's my guy. And so that's one of the reasons why I want to meet him. The other guy I wanted to meet, who's not passed away, is Burt Bacharach. Do you
Oh
remember?
yeah.
Do you remember Burt Bacharach? Now,
He
so
was. He's the. They called him the Mozart of pop.
exactly, because he, his music is really eternal. I mean, you could find his stuff, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and then maybe a bit less. And I mentioned these two guys on Joe Rogan's show. About a day or two later, in my Instagram, I receive a private DM from the son of Burt Bacharach, who says,
Oh,
hey, Professor, I watch your thing. Let's try to hook it up. But then he passed away before we were ever able to do it. So those are my two guys.
those are beautiful.
Who would be yours? Go ahead.
My goodness. Well, I love Burt Bacharach because he really took a form of music and then made it wonderfully. I mean, it wasn't simple. It wasn't simply done, but he brought orchestral
Exactly.
majesty to it, but didn't do it in a complicated way that benefited that kind of complimented his ego.
Yeah.
He made it sound beautiful and simple and approachable. Just like what you do with your works and your speeches is that you make people feel relaxed because you're not going over their head. He did the same thing musically and beautifully layered. And he really was, they called him the Mozart of pop, and he really did deserve that title. And he did have beautiful music that'll last forever. I mean, Clint Eastwood was my guy because I grew up in San Francisco. So Clint Eastwood was when I was a kid, and you saw Dirty Harry.
Oh my God. Yes.
Well, Dirty Harry was actually, you know who they offered that role to first, Gad?
Who?
John Wayne.
Is that right?
And he thought it was too violent. He ended
From
up doing
Newport Beach, conservative from Newport Beach.
he thought it was too violent and didn't think, but he ended up doing a movie called McCain or McQueen or whatever, McQueen or something like that, which was McLean. I think it was called McLean, which was a Dirty Harry, but it was too late. But the guy that was perfect for it was Clint Eastwood because you saw this guy, friend of mine who was making movies in Italy back in, was an extra and in movies in Italy back in the 1960s. He
In
said,
the spaghetti Western movies?
yeah, he was like,
Wow.
he flew out there as 19 years old. His name Boone. He's a Canadian. He's a director by the name of Boone Collins, very dear friend of mine. And he said, I want to be in movies. And he heard about that they were making him in Italy. So he flew out there and he was an extra in some of these movies. And he said, when you saw Clint Eastwood walking down the street, it was like seeing the Mona Lisa walking down the street. This is perfectly handsome guy with coiffed hair and built. I mean, Clint still to this day, 6 o'clock.
And unlike us, tall.
Yeah, tall and 6'4" when that was something, so but he was a guy that I would say one of the most talented guys ever in the Hollywood system. And he was a guy that truthfully didn't have the most range. He stuck to there's two kinds of actors, Gad. You had a guy you have different guys that can play everything. You see Dustin Hoffman when Rain Man, or you see him in uh, you
Oh,
know,
Kramer versus Kramer, no?
you see him in different. He's different in every movie.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He can hide himself. Al Pacino is different in you
True.
see him in The Godfather. Do you see him in Cruising is very different.
Oh,
Uh,
hold on. Stop right there. I got to tell you a story about cruising. You ready?
yeah.
1980, my parents, I think, have just returned for the last time from Lebanon, post having been kidnapped by Fatah. I think it was 1990, maybe 1979 when we went to see the movie. I go with my mother. One of the only times I've ever gone to a movie, I took her to see Cruising, which, for those of you who don't know, it's Al Pacino. He's an undercover cop trying to find a serial killer within the hardcore leather gay world. At the end of the movie, my mother looks at me and says, "Are you trying to tell me something?" I said, "No, mom, I'm not trying to come out as gay by taking you to the movie. I really like Al Pacino."
Was she
So
looking at you during the movie like,
she wasn't, she was uncomfortable because there's a lot of scenes in the movie that you wouldn't expect your 14, 15-year-old child to be sharing that experience with you. And especially if you come from the Middle East. But anyways, forgive me for interrupting you. It just seemed like the right story to tell.
no,
Go
that
on.
was absolutely right because I remember my parents, um, they went to go see a movie that sounded like it was a dance movie, and it was Last Tango in Paris with Marlon Brando, and it was him with the butter and the girl having these sex and blah blah blah, and it was just that my mother, they were scarred for seeing movies for years, and then they finally went again, and they went to go see this movie that with Diane Keaton was in it, and they thought it was going to be a Woody Allen movie, and it turned out to be this Richard Gere's one of his first movies, and it was about a serial killer. It was called Looking for Mrs. Goodbar, which is about this woman who was this promiscuous woman who kept sleeping with everybody until she finally met a serial killer who killed her. My parents stopped going to movies. That was it. They said, "We're not doing this again." But I remember my mom being horrified by those movies.
Okay, go on. So you were talking about guys that have range. Pacino and Kramer would be an
So you
example.
had a guy like you would have a guy that would cling to a character and would basically play different variations of that, whether it's Adam Sandler's a common version of that, or Brad Pitt, or you'd have, Humphrey Bogart, whether he was basically the same guy in the Maltese Falcon as he was in the African Queen.
Yeah.
So he basically hang on to this guy and he would be this guy forever. And that's what you were gonna get. You're gonna get Humphrey Bogart, whether you saw the Petrified
Wow, that's
Forest,
good.
and so that's what you get. And then you have like Clint Eastwood was one of those guys too, but he also became a director. And one of the reasons he said he became a director is because he made this movie in 1965 with Lee Marvin that was called Paint Your Wagon, that was directed by an Englishman who were very, in England they have a saying which is very true. Uh, they said the man does not know his place. In other words, you're here and they're here, and there's a chasm there for a reason. And this director would set up a scene, a shot, and it would be all day setting up one shot, and it would be this cascading thing of events happening, and these rocks coming and the water flowing and people running. And he was just waiting around all day. Him and Lee Marvin were waiting around for this shot to happen. And he said to himself, if I can paraphrase for him or speak for him, I'm never going to do this. If I get a chance to direct a movie, I'm going to make it quick and I'm going to shoot this thing. And he has, and he did. And his first movie that he directed was called Play Misty for Me,
Oh,
that happened
yes.
in his hometown. Brilliant little thriller about, and truthfully, before Fatal Attraction, this was the Fatal Attraction. It was about a female stalker of someone who was a radio personality
Like
and was,
74, 75, something like that.
yes, I think 73, 74. You're
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And he filmed it in his little hometown, beautiful hometown of this is before drones. So all the shots you see of beautiful coastline is a helicopter shot.
All right.
I remember making movies when I was young. Can we get a helicopter for this scene? It's like, no, it's too expensive. Now you get a drone, it's a nickel, basically. Um, and so he made this movie a taut little thriller. And then he directed all these other movies since, whether it was comedies with an
The
orangutan.
orangutan, exactly right.
That's the only time you can ever work. There's a story about that. The only time you could ever work with an orangutan, a full-grown orangutan, because once these great apes turn adolescent, 13, and they grow their incisors, they want to take you out. And
Oh,
the only guy I know of in existence that ever was able to work with full-grown orangutans was a guy named Bobby Bersini. Bobby Bersini had his own act where he had literally 6 full-grown orangutans on stage at a casino, a live show, that these could have jumped into the audience and killed people, but he was able to manage them. And and so when I was doing a movie called The Animal, we wanted to get, at that time, special effects wasn't where now you can just create it and do it. We had to actually get chimpanzees and orangutans. And this was 20 years ago. So I said, well, let's get that guy who did the Clint Eastwood movie. Um, what's it called? Loose or I forget the name of the Clint Eastwood movie where he worked with an orangutan. Left hand Clyde, remember? Left side Clyde, where Clyde would punch a guy.
yeah.
And it was Bobby Bersini. So we got him. Um, and then he told us that, he's Italian, Bersini. He said, Robbie, let me tell you, everything was good in my business. Everything I tell you is what good. And then I have one guy who make a complaint. One guy, he videotaped me. He videotaped me that making the animal. Because you have to, I tell you the truth, Robbie. We have to fool these animals. We cannot just tell them to do stuff. They don't just do stuff. You have to pretend that you are stronger than them. The minute that they think, did I say the minute? The minute that they think that they're stronger than you, you're dead. You're already better 4 times. The bone density is 9 times more than a human. Oh, I'm sorry, 9 times, 7 to 9 times more. Okay, I forget. But anyway, and so what happened was he was correcting one of the animals, and how they corrected is, hey, go over there, you got to do this, and don't misbehave. And what he would do is he grabbed his chest hair like this, and like, hey, no, and so that was cruel. And the casino, it was the beginning of canceling. And so we had him come out to work with us, and the animal actually did some weird things with me, and he left. He literally, the animal was doing this rehearsal with me. We're about to shoot Monday, and this is on a Saturday. We got to shoot Monday, and the full-grown orangutan started doing something where the neck kind of goes up, and he just distracted the animal, puts it, and he's got it on a wheelchair so he can move it because they're very, they can't move that great. And he just wheeled it out. And I said, what happened? Is everything okay? He said, Robbie, I've known this animal for many years. And I must tell you that I've never seen him do an aggressive move like that. And so we can't do the movie. I said, what? We're shooting Monday. Yeah, I'm sorry for you. I can't have this happen to me.
You specifically triggered his ire for some reason?
Yeah, the animal did a move that I don't know. I didn't recognize it, but the whole thing went out like that.
Right.
And as soon as that happened, Bobby came in between, took the animal, distracted the animal, turned it
Oh.
on his chair, and took it out of there. And he said, Robbie, let me tell you. I mean, it's a problem, be a problem for me, the problem for the animal, and mostly a problem for you. They're so quick and so strong, just like that. And then bada boom. And so he literally got in his he had a cage in the bus on the lot. He literally put the animal in the cage on the lot and drove off. Went back to Vegas, and so that was it. So but luckily there was a Universal. There was another orangutan that was younger, and we got to work with that one. So, but that's just, I get it why they don't. You shouldn't work with animals. You know, big strong animals that want to kill you. But I did work with this one orangutan who was 9, not an adolescent, and we shot that scene, which has ended up being pretty funny for the movie.
So,
So,
but tell us the story of when you met Clint Eastwood.
well, not a great story. I literally was at the Whole Foods uh, in Studio City, and I'm walking through the aisle, and all of a sudden I walked, and it was one of those things like, and he literally was on his hands and knees, reaching in, grabbing a can of soup, organic soup,
Oh my
Whole
God.
Foods. And I was like, and he don't want to bug people. They're grocery shopping, whatever. And he's literally turns around. He says, hi. I went, hi. And just a big,
Is that true, or you're just doing the Rob thing?
no, I just said, hi. I'm just, thank you for the joy that you brought. You don't know what to say to people, like the joy that you brought, the
Yeah.
family and me. And I said, and your new movie, Gran Torino. I mean, wow. And he said, and he basically just didn't say much, but like, I said, that's your best movie. You should get an Academy Award for that. He said, the Academy hates me. They've seen too much of me. They're
Right.
sick. He said they're sick of me because he just won the Academy Award for before that. But for Unforgiven. But that was the point.
Unforgiven.
Well, that's when
Unbelievable.
well, fantastic. But that's when you could be a conservative and they didn't hold it against you if you made enough money. But then they kind of changed, and it's a closed system and they are they have retribution
You
and
don't think
it's
you
sad because we should be it's all tolerance. It's a party of tolerance that has no tolerance, and they're not playing around. When
that's
you're
right.
out, you're out forever.
That's right. And before my wife and I had kids, we embarked on a project. So, the AFI, the American Film Institute, every, I don't know
Yeah,
how many years, 10 years or something, they come out with their new top 100 rankings. And so
yeah,
we thought, look, we need to be, cultured people when it comes to films. So let's kind of try to go through all of these. And so we started going through the list. In no systematic way, but to try to get
yeah,
through as many as we could. But then we had kids and we had to abandon the project. Uh, it was really incredible because some of the movies you'd see and you'd go, "Oh my God, I get why this is amazing." So here are two that are on the list, and I'd love to hear what you think about them. So I
yeah.
saw The Apartment with. Do you remember The Apartment?
There's a great story. I only got to meet Jack Lemmon one time. Jack Lemmon, there's a very good story because he got to work with, the great one of the great directors has ever been in Hollywood, Billy Wilder. Billy Wilder made a movie that's probably the most consequential film that was the transition between the silent era and the talkies, which was Sunset Boulevard.
Hmm.
An incredible thing. And that's one of the greatest films of all time. But the movie that he made with Jack Lemmon was really great. The Apartment is probably, one of their best collaborations that they made. And Jack was just this incredible actor. And I only got to meet him one time. There's a great story that about Jack Lemmon. Billy Wilder was giving him direction on a scene. And he said, Jack, can we do the take one more time, Jack? But can you do me a favor? Can you take it down 50%? And Jack is like, yeah, all right. He doesn't take again. Cut. Jack, it's found marvelous. Really like it, but can we try something for me, please? Can we take the same thing what you just did and take it down another 50%? Another 50%, Jack. So Jack goes like, all right. He does the scene again. Cut. Okay. Jack, just one more favor. Can you take what you just did there? Take it down another 50%? Just another 50%. Jack's getting a little annoyed by this point. So he does one more take. He said, cut, Jack. Can we do another 50? He said, if I take it down another 50%, I'll be doing nothing. He said, try that. Isn't that beautiful?
You know what that reminds me of? Do you remember the scene in Forgetting Sarah Marshall
Yeah.
where Paul Rudd
Yeah.
is
Great actor.
is teaching Jason I don't remember his name, the tall guy, the main
Yeah.
actor, how to surf. And as he's getting on the board, he goes, "No, no, could you do a bit less?" Then could you do a bit less? And then at one point, Jason doesn't know what to do because anything less would be for me to just stay on the board. So it's exactly the same principle. Okay, so I saw The Apartment, loved
Yeah.
it. I
Yeah.
saw Double Indemnity, loved it. I saw
Unbelievable.
probably my favorite, All About Eve. I went crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Unbelievable.
I'm
But
going to see
now
that.
here's some other ones that I saw and I didn't get. The Philadelphia Story, I thought sucked. Roman Holiday sucked. So having said all that, you're the professional. I'm just the amateur.
Oh,
What
it's all about taste.
it
There
is
are
taste.
there are some movies that get like literally the Academy. You always like when 100 million people used to watch it for the Academy Awards, as opposed to less than a million now. It's
Wow.
because they have changed their course. They've become so politicized that they're no longer entertainment based. They're just preachy. And back when in the old days, like back in the height of it, I mean, the best movies that came out of the late 1930s, 40s, um, literally 1939, you had six movies that were up for Academy Award, and they were all some of the greatest films ever made. Whether it was Gone with the Wind, it was Gunga Din, um, it was The Wizard of Oz. I mean, you had like there were six, and they were all
Wow.
incredible. Um, And at the same time, in the 1970s was the other high watermark of comedy. I remember watching the Academy Awards with my parents. No politicization at all. What it really had was 100 million Americans would watch the show, and then so many around the world, because it really was a celebration of movies. And you had, beforehand, you'd have the interviews with Barbara Walters, and they'd interview the movie stars of their day. So she'd be interviewing Sean Connery, and she'd, well, Sean, you said the thing about with that a woman, that you could hit a woman. Now, can you please with her list? Can you please clarify your position for people who are horrified by what a horrible thing you said? Said, well, Barbara, what I was saying was basically that for a woman who can get particularly stuck well, emotionally stuck, and I never hit a woman with the front of my hand. With the back of a hand, I find a woman could get unstuck, or whatever he would say, which was absolutely horrible. But you would have these consequential interviews with these gigantic movie stars, and we didn't have that. You didn't have social media where they were telling you what you had breakfast every day. There was they were, these mysterious people that were just fascinating, that you only knew from literally the big screen. And you would go see them, and they were bigger than life. I mean, I remember, like, what Richard Pryor said about John Wayne when he was a kid. Like, John Wayne, he don't go to the bathroom. What you talk about go to the bathroom? It's John Wayne. These people weren't people. They were these gigantic movie stars. And that's when you had the Academy Award that had 100 million people, where you had amazing, talent that was trying to make the best movies that were something, and as opposed to now there's like, they literally have diversity to qualify for an Academy Award. So they're just shooting themselves in the foot. That whole racist thing where, like, which was totally like fear of being a racist, because that's the worst thing you could be in America now. I'm sure in Canada as well,
Yeah.
Gad. It's like the worst thing you could be in America is being perceived as a racist or accused of being a racist. It's like the worst thing you can be in America is three things: pedophile, Trump supporter, racist. Those are the big three.
That's true.
So now you have, it's devolved into where, where you have to have 30% LGBTQ plus to qualify for the Academy Awards. And it's all being preachy stuff. And here's what you never hear on a Friday night. Hey, let's go see that new movie. I heard it's got 30% LGBTQ plus in the crew, and 35% in the cast. And the boom man is a Peruvian homosexual who used to be an associate professor at Portland University.
Nice link back to an earlier thing.
You got it. That's how the comedians work.
Tell me something. How has that made you less in love with your profession, or you're able to still navigate in your creative juices, notwithstanding the fact that all this diversity stuff is in Hollywood?
It is in Hollywood, but Gad, I mean, the thing, I started out as a comedian. So this, like, God works in very mysterious ways. Whereas the thing that you need to learn, like, we're all here to learn. I would say that if there was some design, and I'd say, like, why did God put the apple in Eden? And I just tell people in a crude way, God wants shit to happen. He doesn't just want this peacefulness and everything to be Eden. He wants us to test us in every way that we can. And not just as individuals, but as families, as communities, as nations, and for us to be good stewards, hopefully to continue to be good stewards for this planet. And so these things, these tests that happen, and it's happened to me, for my career, and it's to see it, to see the evolution of it. And I started out as a comedian, and I gave it up because I respected it too much. I didn't want to just do it on the weekends. I remember Jay Leno, when I would used to promote movies, I go on Jay Leno. Hey, why don't you do stand up anymore? I don't understand. You can make, like, oh, you can't down tonight. You do, and it was this little thing, you go, you do this corporate gig. I'm doing one tonight after the show. I gotta play. And those are Jay's two moves. You talk up here, how are you? And come down here. And those are great moves, though. He was the best comedian of his generation. And I said, because, Jay, I respect the art form too much to just go out and make a buck on it on weekends. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it full time and make that my thing. And so when the career kind of got blacklisted, or I should say, because it isn't just a blacklist, but when your movies don't make money, you have a couple that miss, or if you're controversial, because And I say this to people, like, as I say, 'cause you've been blacklisted. It's not just that. It's very complicated because it's not just the studio. It's not just the people, the producers and directors and the executives. I mean, because the executives who are making the decisions, they're not making the decisions like, let's make another All About Eve. Let's make another African Queen. Or The Godfather. They're making decisions in a much more, I would say, self-serving method, Gad. They know they're going to be fired. And then they know it's a matter of time. And they know that the good life of meeting girls, having a house on the beach and traveling around the world and having a lot and the power that it comes with. And when you ever go to a studio lot, there's something that's really interesting and nobody ever talks about. And I've never talked about this either. There's a book because I was waiting for my cab one time and I was waiting and the cab wasn't coming. There's a book, a huge books. And I just went in at the gate to get into the lot at Fox. I said, what are those books? And these are all the old executive producers, directors, and writers who were banned from the lot because they're that angry and whatever. They're now controlling the Democratic Party, those same people. That's my guess. But all these malcontents and angry people who made threats or whatever, these lunatics, because that's what gets in show business.
Oh, you mean Robert De Niro?
These people who are unbalanced, yes, they're not allowed on the lot. And so these are people, so going back to the executives, they're making decisions, not what's the best movie I can make, what can I put my name on, what could stand the test of time and break into that top 100 movies. It's simpler. What will delay my inevitable firing the longest?
Wow.
How can I keep this party going?
So the art part is gone. It's just survival.
Yeah, well, and that's a shift that wasn't that was a long time coming because what really changed the industry was they had the studio system collapsed in like 1967, and it was whereas it used to whatever whether it was somebody was gay and got found out he was gay, that they had a studio system that would protect them. Whether there was somebody was drunk in a car accident, they would or got divorced and they're supposed to be they're Mickey Rooney, blah blah blah, and they would protect them. But the star system, I mean, the studio system collapsed, and with it, the stars that were being held up by it. And so you had to be a producer yourself. And Warren Beatty was one of the guys who produced and found material that was interesting for him. And he made Bonnie and Clyde, which was the first movie that had literally both leads murdered or killed violently at the end of the movie. And that was a studio picture because the studio system had collapsed. And so you also had a movie that was rated X. Another interesting story that was rated X called Midnight Cowboy.
Yeah.
John Voight was the second choice. The first choice, you know who that was for Midnight Cowboy? Elvis Presley.
Wow.
But Elvis, and John Voight doesn't like to tell his story because he feels bad for Elvis, but he won the Academy Award for that. And that would have changed Elvis's career. But Elvis's manager thought it was, too dirty of a movie. And Elvis's manager didn't want to get kicked out of the country because he wasn't here legally. He was a crazy Dutch criminal. So they made that movie, and that movie was rated X because here's an interesting thing that happened. That's how old the Academy of Motion Pictures always is and the people in it. Because at that time, they started putting into a new rating system, to come in and be more modernized. So they instead of just having a general audience and a not general audience, they had G, which for general audience, and then
PG.
PG, which was general audience mature. And then they had R for restricted. And then there was X for adults. Right. Now, what happened was a bunch of old fogies didn't realize that the R was for teenagers and the X was going to be for adults for mature themes. So the first movie that got that stamp was Midnight Cowboy, but they didn't trademark these new symbols. So like PG and PG and R, they weren't trademarked, and X wasn't trademarked. So what happened was the nudies came in, the nude pornographic movies in the movie theaters, swept in by that 1967, 1968. And the censorship laws got dropped in America, thanks to Lenny Bruce and Ken Kesey and Henry Miller, which the obscenity laws changed, which allowed for this new cinema X. And so you had X and double X and triple X. So the movies, which are supposed to be divided into 4 quadrants, which was everybody, everybody, and if you're 13, whatever, you should be with your parents, and then teenagers, and then it was also adults, 17 and over. So the X got thrown out, and all those other movies, which are more adult fare or violent, like Scorsese movies come to mind, Tarantino's, they got squished into the R ones. And so it's still to this day, I still think there needs to be a revamping of R plus or R with a red label or something. And so that's what happened. But the first one that was the only one ever that was a Best Picture Academy Award winner that was X was Midnight Cowboy.
Very interesting. Would you, speaking about range that we were talking about earlier, one could argue that obviously you're a comedic actor. Most if not all of your movies have been in comedy. Is it an aspiration of yours to say, hey, if I can get my hand, Adam Sandler, your buddy, did do a movie where he's not a funny guy, right? Pretty recently. Yeah. If you, is this something that you aspire to do, or no, I know my lane, I'm comfortable in my lane, I want to make people laugh, that's what I'm good at, and I'll stick to it?
Well, I was talking to my friend as the best comedian, the most famous comedian in Spain, certainly, I think the greatest comedian ever in Spain is, not that I know every comedian there, but Santiago Segura. And he's a friend of mine. And I was talking to him about us doing a dramatic film. He said, Robbie, why would you want to do this? We have our specialty. We're comedian. How many people could get laughs like us? I mean, come on. Let's do it. Why don't we stick to what very few people can do like us, huh? Robbie, we stick to this. We stick to this. Robbie.
Oh, with the Spanish lisp. Okay.
It's our specialty.
Yeah, specialty.
Por supuesto, Robbie. And he's right. But I do want to stretch and do things that call out to me. And so there is some films I'd like to make, but we'll see. I mean, I'll say that the difficulties that we have, I really do have faith in God, and that these are just opportunities for us as a society, as family, as a country, to see America's going to decide how we want to move forward as a country. Are we going to still have two parties? It'd be nice if we had three, but are we still going to have two? I mean, that's really up for grabs now in this new election.
You're referencing sort of the super majority that happened in California, and you would think that might happen
so
across.
You're going to have like what happens in California, because I was just there meeting with some investors for my new film and TV and media company.
Are you ready to talk about that here?
Yeah. No, it's a new. I'll talk about it for the first time. No Apologies Media is my new film company, and broadcasting. We're going to do the whole thing. And I was meeting with
wait a second, sorry to interrupt. Is there a movie that focuses on a ridiculously good-looking professor of Lebanese descent in it? Is there at all?
Always.
So there is in the production queue a movie where I star as the leading man. You're going to say that on the record?
On the record. The TV series, you're saying this now, and I mean this. You're going to have to come to Georgia.
Look at it.
Part of the next. Wow, I love it.
This is a real Academy Award that I received. Now it says here Best Husband, and apparently my wife picked it up for a few bucks in Hollywood, but
you did get it in Hollywood.
I did get it, so it is real. Okay, go on.
But we are going to be doing shows about a university professor. That's one of our TV shows we're doing. So you're going to like that. I'm going to send that to you. See if you like it. Okay.
Oh, I would love to check it out. So you mean like a script or something?
Yeah, it's going to be a new TV series.
Oh, that's amazing. That's so exciting. So in your new role with this media company, would you be largely behind the scenes? You're a producer, or you'd be both? You'd be Clint Eastwood, both actor and director.
Well, with all the people that are investing money in this, and a lot of money, I really want to do. You have to do what's best for the project. If I can be helpful, or if I'm too controversial, then I'm going to step out and bring in somebody that has less baggage to it. But if I can be controversial in a good way, I'll stay in it. But again, it's just, we have to do what's best for the project. And I do think we are coming out of this illiberal, illogical mess that's happening. And I think more people, it was nice to hear Zachary Levi, who member of the tribe.
Yes.
Stepping out and he's made movies, Shazam, and he's a really good and handsome member of the tribe.
Should I bring him on the show?
You should. He's a
But it's
great.
always very important. I mean, it is impossible to ever be better looking than me, but I don't like having anybody on the show that could come close to being as good. Not that you're not as good looking.
Yeah,
Not to
that's
imply that.
so thankfully. I'm glad you had me on. I said, well, certainly 10 years ago we might have been had a competition. But yeah, it's just it is nice to be able to make some things and have the creative freedom because I think traditional show business, as far as the studio system, is collapsing in real time. And I think you're going to have the independents that are filling up, that are going to be the ones providing content for the major streamers and for what's left of terrestrial broadcasting, network TV. And so that I think it's going to, because they take up the risk, because it's a lot of risk. But I think at the same time, we're going to have to, I don't want to just be a conservative media company, though we are. I just want to make content for everybody. Gad, I don't want to, which is really, because I used to work for Disney. I made some very good movies, I think, for Disney back 20 years ago. And it's just, and I don't mind saying publicly, it's a shame that my wife and I have to watch the movies first before we show it to our children.
Yeah.
To make
So
sure.
when would be the first product that comes out from this new media company?
It'll probably be, we're going to start with Andrew Doyle is a British broadcaster. You might know. He's also,
He's been on my show, I think.
he's brilliant. And
Yes.
he
he has a PhD.
Yeah, no, he's a real professor.
Yeah. Go on.
And he's a real intellectual. As I'm just a fill in the blank because there's nobody available intellectual. No, but he's coming over and he's going to be one of our broadcasters and one of our
Amazing.
men. And then we're bringing over some people, some comedians who I can't mention now because they're worried about the being continued to be canceled. And I told them they're going to be free here in the United States. And then probably the first product we're going to make is a TV series. And I can't say where it's going to come out, but we're in negotiations for one of the biggest sites in the world. And we'll be their first TV series. And the first person I tell will be you when we can do it.
I am so excited. All right. Before
And
I
have
let
you in that show.
I can't wait. That's one thing that I don't have. I'm already soccer star. I'm former adult film star. Okay, that's not true. I just made that up. But but honestly, I mean, I know we're joking around. I love people who are true polymaths. So if you ask me who is the person that I'd want to most sit down with for dinner, historically, it'd be Leonardo da Vinci. Why? Because he's
he was a surgeon.
He's everything, right?
He's an artist.
He's an artist.
Inventor.
He's a dreamer. He's a futurist. He's an engineer. He's an anatomist.
Teacher.
Everything. So I love that. I mean, if truly ever I could have some appearance in your movie and I could put that, you know what? Life is a playground. So in this book right here, right? This is my book on happiness. I have a whole chapter about life as a playground. Even science is a form of play, right?
Well, I believe it. I mean, that's the true definition of existence to me. What is it? If you had to say, it's why our eyes, as Alan Watts said, that's why our eyes point out, not in. We're supposed to look out like that. And if you look at, there's really only, well, most people would say that there's two interpretations of existence. And I think Alan Watts talks about the third one. I mean, one is the clay model of existence, which is simply like that God made us from clay and from dirt, and then Adam came from the rib, and that our whole existence is looking at things like, well, we owe God, and there's this, you never see a picture in the medieval picture of Jesus laughing or smiling. It's always like, we're going to talk later, and you know what it is, and it's going to be important. And the other one is, this worse than agnostic is this atheistic view of the world, as everything's just an accident bumping into each other, and then when you're dead, and it's kind of this cold nihilistic version of existence. But there is a third one, and which you've alluded to, which is the idea of life as a drama, life as play, life as a gigantic play, and life as a joyful play, for us to learn whatever we're supposed to learn this lifetime and experience that from a place of learning. And that learning is something that's the first thing we do, is we teach kids the first game, which is the game, because it's the beginning game we teach kids, and it is the end game for all of us, which is, you're not here, now you're here.
Right.
Now you're not here. That's the beginning and the end of all games. And from there, it's this joyous, beautiful search. And I would just tell all people, like, to calm down about this entire experience that we're having here in the United States, where people are so upset and so worried about the election. It was much tougher in the 1860s during that war, where so many people,
Yeah.
1 out of every 6 citizens died in the colonial United States. And in the same time, World War II, my mother starved, and both her brothers were killed by the Japanese during her childhood. And she never felt any bitterness towards the Japanese. She just was able to put that out of her, and to categorize that as a time of war. That's what she told me. And she never felt fearful. So I would just say this experience that we're going through right now is a blessing, because we're able to decide what kind of country we want, what kind of experience, and how we're going to interpret this in a way where we could live peacefully with one another and joyfully.
Amen. Let me remind people of the book. You can do it! Exclamation point. Speak Your Mind, America. Go out, get it. Rob, what a delight it is to have met you. I know we met in person last year, but we didn't get a chance to have such an in-depth conversation. Thank you so much for coming on. Stay on the line so we could say goodbye offline, and please come back anytime when you want to talk about.
This is just part one of our
Exactly.
conversation.
By the way,
I didn't get a chance to talk about your book and your influence on me. You have been a calming, great influence, not just on me, but on so many people that I know. We all are your admirers, but we're also your students. Because you really do. You're a peaceful warrior, and you are secretly teaching all of us, and that is a wonderful place. And when I give speeches, when I talk to kids, just yesterday, I was thinking about you and having that positive, peaceful warrior. And gently instructing people and subverting them. Not
beautiful words. Thank you so much. Maybe I'll cut that clip and play it back whenever I feel bad about myself. Thank you so much.
Stay on your trophy.
There it is. There's my Academy Award, people. And stay on the line.